All right. So welcome, everyone. Just give everyone a moment to sit down. It's 10 o'clock. We might as well get started. Welcome all to Shifting Gears, the Future of Automated Vehicles with Bright Blue in partnership with Allianz on this unexpectedly, suddenly sunny Manchester morning. Congratulations for surviving to day 3 of conference and for making it past security. So I am Will, I'm a researcher at Bright Blue, and I'll be chairing this morning. Just obviously to a few bits of thing at the start, obviously we're hosting this event in partnership with Allianz. This event is being live streamed and we will be taking questions from the audience in the room towards the end. For those of you who don't know, Bright Blue is an independent think tank and pressure group for liberal conservatism, and we do research across 7 broad themes: bountiful economy, clean environment, good lives, rewarding work, empowering government, just institutions, and connected communities. And if we would encourage everyone to tweet about this event, or X, or post, or whatever it's called these days, using the hashtag BrightBlue, and to follow at WeAreBrightBlue, all one word, and at Allianz UK News, again, all one word. And again, we have, for first, I must also introduce the panel. You know who I am, but we are very lucky to have, in no particular order, the Right Honourable Chris Grayling, the former Secretary of State for Transport, who has been Conservative MP for Epsom and Ewell since 2001, Laura Shoaf, CBE, the Chief Executive of the West Midlands Combined Authority, Ben Everitt, who has been the MP, who's been the Member of Parliament for Milton Keynes North since 2019, and sits on the House and Commons Levelling Up Housing and Communities Committee, Nicholas Hellen, the Transport Editor for the Sunday Times, Professor John McDermid, Professor of Software Engineering at the University of York, Alexandra Hammond-Chambers-Borgnis, who is the Director of Underwriting for Retail Allianz Personal. And we have a series of 10 questions that the speakers are going to address, and I would ask that all speakers try to stick to a 5-minute time frame, just so we can ensure that people have a chance to ask questions at the end. And the questions we have there's 10 of them. Are self-driving cars really the future? And if so, how far away are they? What is needed for automated cars to have commercial and regulatory viability to be driven on UK roads? What are the existing barriers for the rollout of automated vehicles for everyday use? Is the government doing enough to provide a credible route map for the rollout of electric or automated vehicles? What do the public think about using automated cars? What will be the nature and scale of the economic impact of automated vehicles in the UK? Will automatic vehicles be safer than existing cars? What is the right legal and insurance framework for dealing with accidents involving automated vehicles? How feasible and impactful will automated vehicles be for the public sector fleet? And what more can public policy do to support significant innovation in transport policy? Now, you've heard quite enough of me speak, so to get proceedings underway, I would invite the Right Honourable Chris Grayling to open the discussion.
Well, thanks, and good to see you. Welcome to all of you. About 6 years ago, I pronounced, probably slightly prematurely, that I thought the first entirely driverless car would be on UK roads by about 2022 or 2023. And to some degree, the first vehicles are indeed already there. But the progress towards genuinely automated vehicles on our roads, I think, is still in the relatively early stages. And I think we have to look at what is happening in 2 ways. The first is that actually, and they're often referred to as connected and automated vehicles, connectivity around our vehicles is growing all the time. And frankly, I drive my electric car around and discover that there's been a software update overnight and it's doing something different to what it was doing yesterday. So that's already happening, and it will continue to happen, and I think it will make motoring easier. You'll get more and more live streamed information into your car. Your car will adapt and develop. And whether it's Tesla or the Ford that I've got or other vehicles, they will develop continuously. But there is a world of difference between a car that is increasingly able to assist the driver, and clearly adaptive cruise control as the technology is developing very fast. We are seeing the government gave permission to Ford a few months ago to have the first motorway-driven cars with drivers having no hands on the wheel for an extended period. At the moment, if you take hands off the wheel, the car will drive itself and stick within lane, but after about 30 seconds, it'll start to scream at you until you put your hands back on the steering wheel. The new Ford development has moved beyond that. We have lane changing in some vehicles. But to me, we will never have properly autonomous vehicles in this country until they can do a single track lane with passing spaces. Mm-hmm. And we are nowhere near that at the moment. We're probably decades away from that. So I see the development as automated vehicles as being an incremental one. As each generation of vehicles comes onto the market, as each software update drops into your vehicle, so the car will be able to do more and more. But I see no path right now with existing technological streams that takes us to the point where we have what I see as a really beneficial future, where the car, you get your phone out, you tap the phone, the car drives around the corner with no driver, picks you up, takes you where you want to go. And actually for the disabled, for the elderly particularly, that is a fantastic vision. Sadly, we are not close to it yet. In terms of the regulatory environment, when I was Secretary of State, we made a start to try and help make it easier to deal with the insurance issues around greater autonomy of the vehicle. Traditionally, it is you, the driver, who are insured rather than the car. But if the car is doing more and more, there's got to be a greater balance in insurance. I'm sure we'll hear about that in a moment. And the government is taking incremental steps, hence the licensing of Ford to allow the driver of a Mustang to take their hands off the wheel. But I do think this needs to be done carefully. There are areas of the world, the United States being case in point, where there are more genuinely autonomous vehicles in operation, but they're typically doing so in big cities with grid-based roads, and even there have been incidents and problems. So I think my view is we're getting there, but our road system is a whole lot more convoluted than the United States. Our city streets are a whole lot more convoluted than the United States city streets, and I think we've got some way to go before we can genuinely say that driverless cars are operating widely in the UK.
Thank you so much, Chris. Next I'll ask Laura.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. I'm the Chief Executive of the Combined Authority in the West Midlands, which is we like to think that we are the home of transport innovation, and I'm thrilled to be here because this is, I think, one of the most interesting things happening in transportation. And it is strange because it always feels like with technology, we were talking about this as the Right Honorable Chris Grayling just said 10 years ago, and it was like, oh, it's about to happen, and then nothing happens. And then you wake up and there are autonomous taxis in San Francisco. So it always feels like it lurches, everybody gets excited and then it goes quiet and then it starts to happen. But it is happening, and we're really pleased about what we're doing in the West Midlands. So over the past decade, we've really been investing. So we are a 5G enabled region. We have a 5G pilot in the West Midlands, which has been a huge part of trying to deliver what we call a sandbox. It's sort of a terrible phrase for a place where you can innovate and play and try new things. But because the automotive sector is such a big part of the West Midlands economy, it's been a really big part of our economic plan for growth, is how to support this. So we actually built a connected and autonomous mobility test bed in the West Midlands. So we have about 300 miles of motorways and urban roads and rural roads that go from Birmingham and Solihull and Coventry and North Warwickshire, where we can test and people do test and trial different bits of autonomy. Solihull Council, the leader of Solihull Council is in the room, has been deploying autonomous shuttle buses on roads around Birmingham Airport and the National Exhibition Centre. Those are on the roads as we speak and trialing and being very successful. And we're working on a bunch of new technologies in our devolution deal. So this is looking at how we can exploit new low-speed, zero-emission, and automated trials, and again, wider automated vehicle trials in our region. But we need a regulatory framework in order to do this, and as part of that deal, we've been saying the government needs to bring forward permanent legislation. We have to have that enabling framework for this to really take off. But we do think there's some big questions. So the data certainly tells us that automated technologies will make the roads safer. They will definitely reduce the incidents that human error cause. But people have a higher level of tolerance for forgiving humans than they have for forgiving machines. So there's definitely a challenge in how we're going to deal with that. It definitely will improve the user experience, improve accessibility, and for people with disabilities, as was mentioned, is really helpful. It's also a huge bit of the economy, can help our national economy grow. We don't want to lose sight of that. So we have to collaborate. So if you are developing a new vehicle, in the West Midlands, there's a 3D simulator at the University of Warwick, and they're doing some fantastic work around how they can simulate driving around the West Midlands roads. We can adjust for weather and traffic and mobile phones. So using the university and the industry in the West Midlands has been a huge part of it. We can then recreate that closed circuit at the track at Hariba-Myra, which again, working with private sector to try to help develop this. And then you can actually test it on the roads in Coventry and on our key route network. And again, having trialed it at the NEC and now being trialed at Birmingham Airport, we've done so much learning. We have understood what's really worked. And although it's a small trial, if that makes sense, you can start to understand how we could increase that fleet so we could have more passenger vehicles in our real world deployment, if that's the best way to say it. So it takes a lot of investment. We are grateful. We've had a lot of investment from the DFT. We've had some work done with the M6 tolls. And again, the data, working with the universities, the private sector, the public sector, is the only way that this is going to come forward. So now what we really want to do is to enable those trials to continue, spread out wider than just the West Midlands, and again, to try to bring that regulatory framework to allow it to happen. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Laura. And Nicholas, I'll bring you in.
Hi, so I'm transport editor at the Sunday Times, Nicholas Hellen. I'll try and find a way through this. We've got a lot to work with, haven't we? 10 questions and lots of different speeches. But I did a bit of research yesterday. I spoke to a guy called Mike Hawes, who runs the SMT. It's a motor trade body. I said, what do we need to know? What's the prediction then? He said, well, he lives about a mile from me in London during the week. And he said, I'm not going to be able to drive in a driverless car to Scotland in my lifetime. He's 58 and he's in pretty good health. So you've got an answer there. So that's giving it, 30 years? But of course, the problem with all of this is we have to unscramble what we're really talking about. Driverless means that there's a level of rankings which goes from 0 to 5. At the moment, all that's authorised on British roads, with the form that Chris was talking about, was level 2. So that's where you can let go at a low speed, up to 38 mph, for a short period, but it has to alert you. So we're talking about a vast amount of different concepts here. We're talking about the sort of robotic technology which is actually being used, whether in warehouses, airside, in very controlled environments. So when we ask the question, what are we really trying to answer? I think also what we have to think very hard about is how unpredictable developments are in the way in which technology takes off. So to give a very mainstream example, with electric cars, until Tesla came along, speaking very broadly, the car companies thought the future of electric cars was little things like gee whiz. It wasn't. They'd lost a lot of money on it. The future of electric cars was big shiny things which went faster and were quicker in accelerating and more attractive than ICE cars. So there are lots and lots of imponderables here. In terms of where we are right now, from what I'm told, you're not going to see mainstream autonomous vehicle development in the UK. You're going to get it in the supply chain, which is a very drab word for all the sort of things that you were talking about. Firms like Ariba Mira, firms like Oxbotica, who are going to come up with lots of different applications. In terms of the big car companies, it's worth being aware of what Tesla are up to with autopilot. Right now, we're waiting to hear the outcome of the investigation by the road transport safety body there called the NHTSA, which has been examining about 830,000 Teslas which have been using autopilot. There have been about 27 deaths in the last 7 years, I think, in the States. So the minute things go mainstream, you're going to get pushed back. I agree entirely with what you said, that there's much less tolerance if it's a death or serious injury from a machine than from another human. Another wise owl, Matthew Avery, who is the key person at something called Euro NCAP, his remark to me the other day was, note how all the manufacturers at the moment are staying well shy of the point where they have to handle the insurance, right? So we'll be hearing from the insurers, I'm sure. But at the moment, whatever you want to call the level of autonomy you've got, the problem rests with the driver. So if it's your liability. I like Chris's example of Highland Trails. I'd give I don't know if my time's probably just about up, but I'd say you would not believe, there's a really interesting document by the Law Commission. I don't know if I'm the only person who's read it. It runs to about 270 pages. Comes with all sorts of things, such as the scenarios say the difference between a car spotting that it finds it harder to spot a woman wearing a long dress, say, or somebody wearing a long shawl than somebody wearing tight trousers because it can't detect the movement. But the most simple things, like the gestures we do when we say, no, you first, we're literally talking about having to put big emojis on cars, right? Which you sort of think, at this point, it's probably wise just to let them all go back and sort it out before they think of bringing them onto the roads. So there's an awful long way to go, but yes, under the surface, there's a lot of tech already happening.
Thank you so much, Nicholas, and I'll bring in Ben.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for coming to this what was a bright and sunny morning and no longer is, because we're in Manchester and that's just how it works up here. But it's we're almost packed, and it's kind of first fringe of the day, and that just shows how important this is and how relevant it is. I'm an optimist, and I'm actually probably a lot more upbeat, I think, than our previous speakers. This technology is game changing. It's a huge opportunity for the UK to deliver social benefits, economic benefits, environmental benefits, but most of all, it's an opportunity for us to lead the world, to do what we're good at, or what we used to be good at in the UK, which is get our IP and operationalise it. And it's great to be sat next to Laura, to the absolute hub of car making in the UK, the West Midlands. I come from Milton Keynes. I'm the MP for Milton Keynes North, and if you do cars in the West Midlands, we do tech in Milton Keynes. We are a new city. We're the city of the future. We have, the last 6 years, we've had robots delivering our shopping. You can in Milton Keynes, you can go on your app, do your shopping online, and a robot will appear at your door with your shopping. That's the culture in Milton Keynes. I took my kids to Milton Keynes Museum at the beginning of summer, and there was a driverless car pod in Milton Keynes Museum. It's old in Milton Keynes. This is history I'm teaching the kids about, right? So this is not just the future. This is now. We've got driverless car trials. We've got driverless pod trials. We've got the same driverless bus technology that you've got at the airport. We've got it buzzing around the Stadium MK. Crucially, as well as that culture of people born and raised in Milton Keynes buying into the idea of technology and living with the robots, as well as that culture, we've got the infrastructure. And Chris was talking about the grids in the US that make this kind of thing so easy to roll out, and that's what they're doing in San Francisco right now. We have grids in MK. So we already have the technology. It's already on our street. It's already being accepted by the local people. And that's crucially the main barrier. That's that, you know, the size of the prize is obvious. And it's driven by AI, so that's a $600 billion global industry. The self-driving bit is $350 billion by 2035. Good slice of that pie that we need for the UK. But the bit that we need to nail is not the insurance, the regulation, and the tax incentives and so on. It's the culture. It's getting the public acceptance to buy into the business case of this is safer, it's more environmentally friendly, it's more efficient, it's just more convenient, it's more accessible for people with disabilities. So that's where we need to be having the conversation. I'm very happy to talk about all the other bits and bobs, the regulation, the technology, data sharing as well, trying to get the manufacturers to play with the insurers. Insurers are desperate to see that data, and the manufacturers are desperate to keep it to themselves. But it is a really exciting time, and I think things are moving much quicker than we think. But if we don't get this regulation right, get that signal to the market that it's okay to invest in the West Midlands, to invest in battery technology, in manufacturing, in servicing, if we don't get that next layer of investment coming in, other people will. And I'm thinking Germany, Scandinavian countries, obviously the US. So that's our challenge. It's not quite a burning platform, but all the pieces are there, and we happen to have a King's Speech coming up. I'd love to see a self-driving bill in the King's Speech.
Thank you so much, Ben. Could I now bring in Professor McDermid?
Thanks very much and good morning. So I'm John McDermid. I've worked on safety of computer-controlled systems for almost 40 years. For the last 6 years, I've run a major research centre on safety assurance and regulation of autonomous systems, including self-driving vehicles. I've acted as advisor to government and industry in a number of continents, and recently I've been working with both the DFT and a number of self-driving vehicle companies. Even for me, talking fast, 10 questions is a lot for 5 minutes, so I'll pick out a few. So, are self-driving cars really the future? And if so, how far away? I think, like Chris Grayling, my view is yes, but they're quite a long way away, maybe 5 to 10 years, and maybe only in limited domains. Actually, driving is really hard for computers. We understand the world in a way that computers don't, and actually training the machines to understand the world is really very, very hard. What's needed for commercial and regulatory viability? Well, commercial, actually need a business model that allows people to make money. People talk about mobility as a service, but I've yet to see a business model that works. Cruise and Waymo are all losing shed loads of money, and they're rich enough to afford it. From a legal point of view, we've heard about the Law Commission report. It's excellent. I have read it. I'd really like to see that get parliamentary time. That regulation is needed. Existing barriers for everyday use, actually making them work. The technology is very sophisticated, it's very clever, but also flawed, and it's not yet mature enough for prime time. So like you said, I don't see these happening anytime soon. Assurance of safety, my heart. There's no real consensus on what's necessary. There aren't sufficient standards. Organisations like the Vehicle Certification Agency in this country are really doing an excellent job, but there's a lot more to be done, and they need support to do that. What do the public think? Well, some believe they're already here. They're wrong, but it's actually quite concerning. Others fear them. I think good regulation should ease that. And again, what was being said earlier about incremental introduction will actually deal with some of those fears. Will it be safer than existing cars? Yes, ultimately, but expect them to be worse, maybe quite a lot worse initially. That's typical for new technologies. If you look at the graphs of accidents with aircraft, they were really very bad in the early years and they improved over the decades. We see the same here, but again, this idea of incremental introduction, I think, is a way of reducing the risks, controlling the risks to the public. What's the right legal and insurance framework? Well, as well as what the Law Commission said, we need to have an accident investigation branch to deal with problems when they arise. We also need legislation to enable them to do the forensic analysis necessary. If they can't do that, we won't learn the root cause of these problems, and therefore won't be able to avoid them in the future, and won't be able to reassure the public that things are going to improve. Insurance, we'll hear more in a moment, but the simple thing is we will need to shift insurance away from insuring drivers to insuring vehicles, with the onus on the manufacturers. And what about public policy? I'd just like to pick up on a point that Nicholas Hellen said earlier. Actually, driving is a social activity. In talking to people directly, we recognize, body language and so on. We do the same with other vehicles on the road, and back off, or make headway into a gap if somebody else is giving up for us. Actually, the manufacturers talk about ego vehicles. Actually, we need the policy shift to encourage people to design vehicles to work interactively and collaboratively with others on the road. And that's a policy shift. It also needs a funding shift in the way the research is done. So I'm sorry if that's more than my 5 minutes, but I'll stop now. Thanks.
No worries, thank you so much. And last but by no means least, Alexandra.
Thank you, and apologies for the horrible surname. I'm Alexandra Hammond-Chambers-Borgnis. I work for Allianz here in the UK, and my role is as underwriting director for our personal lines insurance. So what that means is, for the world's largest insurance company, I help assess risk. So this is right up my street, and something I'm really excited to be here talking about. And I'm afraid, Ben, I am going to talk about the bits and bobs a little bit, because there are some really interesting points that everyone's raised, and what we keep coming back to, in my view, is certainty. So when we talk about Chris's over-the-air update into his vehicle, that happens quite commonly now on both electric and IC vehicles. What we see is that a car can change overnight, and the car you get into could be more powerful, could have better braking, could have a different control panel screen, a bit like your mobile phone updates. And that's absolutely fine if that's what you're expecting. But as a driver, it's all about how do you know what is happening, and are you comfortable at the point at which you are responsible for an action of the vehicle. And I think when we extend that on to John's point, we have these level 2 vehicles on the road where ultimately drivers are in control. Even if they've got their hands off the car and their eyes on the road, they're still in control of that vehicle from a legal and insurance point of view. We are not yet at the place where any manufacturer has committed to that transfer of liability to the vehicle. And whilst it might feel that the data is something that sits in the background of everything we do and it's an excuse, it's actually incredibly important for customers and drivers to know that in the event of an accident, we can be clear about whether they were responsible for that accident. When you think about driving down a busy motorway and you've got your hands off and your eyes off because you think your car is driving for you, and you're turning around and looking at your children in the back of your car, you need to know where the responsibility for that action sits. So it isn't just about the legal framework, it isn't just about the transfer of liability for insurance, it's about building confidence for the public. Because I genuinely don't think that people will confidently put their children in these cars until they know where their boundary ends for their responsibility. And so I think that regulatory and legal framework is very, very important for building public confidence. And that's why I think the time horizons we've been talking about building in commercial spaces where it's a bit more controlled and perhaps there's a little bit less risk, is very likely in the next 3 to 5 years. But it might take a little bit longer in the public space because we do need to get that data and that transfer of liability really clean and clear. I think there's so much to be positive about in this space, and one of the really wonderful things about my job working for a global insurer is I get to see what's happening in other countries, and there's some just really interesting things happening in Southeast Asia. And I think we do have the opportunity to really lead in this space, but it has to be collaborative. It has to be the insurance industry, it has to be government, it has to be the regulatory bodies and the vehicle manufacturers who work together to build that confidence in that public trust to create certainty, because that's what we all need.
Thank you very much. I guess now we'll open this up to the floor. I might, just trying to think of any questions there, I might sort of take groups of sort of 2 or 3. So could I have the 2 gentlemen on this side, and then I'll come to this side afterwards. Who's got the microphone? Well, if there's no microphone, we'll just...
I'll just speak loudly. Duncan Dollimore from Cycle UK. Professor McDermid very honestly and openly said that he expected this to have safety benefits for all road users, but in the short or medium term, correct me if I'm paraphrasing you incorrectly, it would get worse, much worse. It reminded me of a comment that I heard at a conference from a DFT official back in 2016 saying a similar thing, and it rather felt as though a 3-line whip went out after that within the Department for Transport, that nobody was actually supposed to say that, because I haven't actually heard anybody repeat that until you today, Professor McDermid, that it would get worse. So my question for the panel is, what can be done to prepare the public for that reality? And do the panel think the public will accept that? Because we are talking about road casualties potentially increasing for a period of time before they decrease.
Well, shall I pick up, just as having been Secretary of State at that time? I can say categorically, I never heard or was involved in any conversation to that effect. That in any way the move towards autonomous vehicles would lead to a high number of casualties, nor that was something that should be accepted, nor that was something that should be kind of swept under the carpet. So I'll give you absolute categorical assurance of that. And you know, it remains my view. I mean, clearly, for other road users, there is a big issue, and we need to be sure that this technology doesn't endanger the lives of pedestrians and cyclists and so forth. And it's one reason I think that we are still some distance away from, I mean, you know, Ben's right, Milton Keynes is kind of your obvious kind of test bed where it could work because of the nature of Milton Keynes, but I can assure you don't have the wide boulevards in Epsom. You have narrow streets with parked cars either side. So I think this has to be done carefully, and I see no environment in which any government would simply say, more people are going to die if we do this, and so therefore, because it's necessary for the future, we need to put up with that. I just can't see any government being willing to accept that. I certainly would never have accepted that as a minister.
Can I comment? I mean, what you say about the government position, I'm sure is exactly right. I said worse, not necessarily much worse. I think the problem is we're just dealing with uncertainties, things that we don't know, but that's actually why we need a process for understanding accidents that do occur and rectifying that. I think if these things are initially deployed in small numbers, which they will be, we can learn, and actually the net risk from the introduction will be quite low, but the risk per individual vehicle, I think, will go up. I mean, there was a lady run over by a cruise vehicle in San Francisco last night, quite badly injured. I fear those things will happen until we get better at understanding these. You know, and so, you know, without wishing to be too technical, you know, human beings understand, you know, the world around them. We're taught it, but we also learn it as we grow up. Actually getting that level of understanding of the world and people's intentions and things like that into these vehicles is actually extraordinarily difficult. And actually, you know, as we increase the number of vehicles that are automated, actually going to become easier. At some point, it's the initial mix that I think is really very difficult, which is why I say I think there needs to be a focus on looking at driving as a social process, a collaborative process, not just focusing on individual vehicles. You know, and I think if we do that, that's actually going to reduce a lot of the risks that have occurred so far. And I think the UK is in a better position in the US because of its regulatory environment. I think we do have the controls to introduce things in a gentle and controlled way, which is not happening in the US. So I think there's a different balance. But I wanted to say that just to make people realise this is not easy technology. It's not magically going to be better than human drivers. It's really quite difficult to do, and I'll be brief, but one of the reasons for saying this is, you know, of a lot of accident statistics, you know, 93% of accidents are caused by people or whatever, but we don't have stats on those that weren't caused, and by the things that people have done to avoid accidents, respond to others, making inappropriate manoeuvres. So, you know, we need to understand how to get the vehicles to do that as well. And that, I think, is also much harder. Adjusting for misbehaviour of other road users is quite a difficult thing to do as well. So I think we will get there, but there's a lot to do in this space.
Can I just come in, though? I mean, it's pretty grim. We've had, I think, 10 fatalities in the past month in the West Midlands, all hit and runs. I mean, it's not exactly safe for cyclists at the moment, and it would be my take. Actually, the roads are, you know, it's not ideal. So I think that part of the argument is to come back to say human beings are less than perfect. You know, cars don't drink, cars don't do drugs, get behind the wheel and race 80 miles an hour down urban streets, which I'm not joking, we have a lot of in our urban areas. So it might have to change, but, you know, I would hardly start with we're in a position of utopia at the moment in terms of safety for people on our streets.
I'd like to just add to that. I mean, I agree entirely. There's a danger that we look at this through the wrong end of the telescope, and focus in on a small amount of accidents that involve driverless cars, missing the larger point that globally millions of people die on the roads, and those are not involved with self-driving technology. It is fair to say that there will be fewer accidents involving driverless cars. There will still be accidents. There will, because people go near roads and get run over, and it doesn't matter what's going on inside the box that hits them. It's the people that get themselves run over that is generally the issue. And I think it would be wrong to focus on accidents. Then actually we need to look at the big picture and look at overall safety. The point the Professor was making about recognising that humans take action to avoid accidents, I think this speaks to the need for education about driverless cars and how self-driving technology works, because the self-driving technology does that too. We just don't see it happening. We don't observe it because we're humans, and so I think there's the challenge for us is when it comes to acceptance and understanding in the general public and in policymakers as well, is to understand how that technology works and have those cases about how it is safer because the technology is taking action to avoid circumstances that could lead to accidents.
May I pile in on just 2 points? Is that all right? Okay. So I think that there was an interesting point underlying that by Duncan just now, which is we all make trade-offs. We don't want to think about it, but we do. So look at the 20 mph debate right now, which has become so salient in Wales. The Prime Minister's been talking about it. We all know that if you drop the speeds, there will be fewer killed and seriously injured. It's just a matter of fact. And we don't really want to think about saying, well, how many lives extra would it be worth to allow the speed to go up? But that's the actual calculation. And something which is barely talked about is something called Vision Zero, which London, Sheffield, and now probably Manchester are going to implement, which means 0 killed or seriously injured by 2041. Now, to my knowledge, the last time we had that on the roads was 1895. And do you know what speed cars were doing then? And the woman who died, she was killed in a 4 mph vehicle, right? So it's sometimes just worth looking at that. The other thing, and truly this is not meant to be a party political thing, because it involved all governments, but if you want to know about the way people react to deaths, which they somehow think are caused by tech rather than by people, that, I know it's a broad brush thing, just think of the whole smart motorways debate, where people think they're trapped because there wasn't a hard shoulder, and those deaths become very, very emotive, and we all know what's happened about the reversal of it. And then there's all the examination of the stats. We can all talk about that fairly well up on that. But I really wouldn't underestimate the level of backlash when something goes wrong. And you just have to be aware of that, because it can set the tech. If you're a supporter of the tech, or you think it's got great hopes, that could set it back a long way.
Sorry, the person who was waiting, and then I'll take some from the other side.
Hi there, my name's Alexandra for a pretty big vehicle manufacturer. Just a couple of things that haven't been mentioned that I'd love to get the panel's point of view on. Thank you so much, it's been a great panel so far. The first is haulage and HGVs. I've just checked, by pure coincidence, the population of Milton Keynes is fractionally lower than the number of full-time truck drivers in the UK. They're driving often point to point. They're not on small roads. They're restricted to 7 hours and 20 minutes per day. Their vehicles cannot be restricted to 7 hours, 20 minutes per day. The impact of AI and driverless on that industry is more commercially obvious, less dangerous because they're not driving on small roads, more incentivized and ready. So I'd love to hear the panel's point of view on that. And the second, that I'm thrilled, Chris, that you've got a Ford Mach-E, because I happen to know a bit about that software. And Ford, for instance, know how fast you've ever been in your car. If you've ever been above 70, I'm sure you haven't, your car knows. Now, there is a criminal liability issue there, because your car is aware of a crime, potentially. Not your car, of course. One's car might be aware of a crime. At what point would the criminal liability fall on the auto manufacturer to report that crime?
So I think, and Nick may know more about this than I do, I've got lodged in my mind that this debate is happening in Germany in some shape or form. But I mean, you're really in the Big Brother world then.
Yeah.
And it's going to be, it's a very interesting question to which I don't know the answer. I'd be interested to hear what the others think.
So I don't know the answer, but what I would say is this touches on the incredibly interesting if you're an underwriter, but probably not so interesting for the rest of the world conversation around access to data and ownership of data. So one of the challenges around autonomous vehicles and getting access to data at point of accident and connected vehicles generally is exactly what you touch on. Who owns that data? Who has the responsibility for the information contained within that data? And therefore, who should be monitoring and acting upon it?
Do you mind if I ask the only follow-up there?
Of course.
The regulation right now is incredibly clear. It's exactly the same as if you tell your psychiatrist, I'm planning on burning a school down. At that point, the data ceases to be personal data and becomes the confession of and the responsibility of criminal data. And the person who has had that shared with them has the requirement under law to share it with the police.
And as a vehicle manufacturer, that's obviously up to you in terms of your internal policy as to how you monitor and handle that data. But I think coming back to my earlier point around certainty, I think it's likely that almost everybody who drives a vehicle in this room has a connected vehicle in some way or other. So your vehicle will have some connectivity, even if it doesn't have specific autonomous or assisted driving features. And therefore, this could apply to you, and you're not necessarily aware of that. Now, would that change your behaviour? Hopefully not. Hopefully nobody has sped on the way here today, and therefore it's not an issue. But I think the whole point about the evolution of these vehicles is actually that people need to be aware of how they should behave in the context of the machine they're operating. Where does the onus sit with them, and where does the onus sit with the manufacturer and the insurer? And actually, one of the things that I was reflecting on as we were talking about cyclists is if I was a lobbyist for e-scooters or e-mobility, rather than our previous question asker about pedal cycles, I would be much more concerned, because at the moment the kind of autonomous emergency braking is very effective for bicycles because it's been calibrated, because there are lots of cyclists on our road. E-scooters have taken off in the last couple of years, and although they're very prevalent on the road, they're very new, and that's where manufacturers have to catch up. So I think all of these kind of emerging questions are the things that we actually need to just take a beat and make sure we're really confident in terms of certainty, because the law might be very clear, but people's expectation might not be. And where you've got that mismatch is where you can create a challenge.
Can I just briefly comment on that? I mean, this is why I say we need an accident investigation branch who would have to have access to this sort of data. And the speed limit's quite easy, but lots of things are much more equivocal. I mean, my favourite highway code rule is the number 129, which says you shan't cross the double white line unless there's something stationary or doing less than 10 kilometres an hour in front of you, and it's safe to do so. So if a vehicle has crossed the double white lines and an accident occurs, they've made a misjudgment. But if they push somebody off the road and there's no crash, so I think it's going to be getting access to this data to be able to do the analysis and attribute responsibility is going to be really crucial. And your trucking question, I suspect that might be one of the use cases where there really is a commercial return and where it will happen. You know, 30% of the trucks on the road, or 30% of the miles of trucks on the road are empty. So if you can both actually, you know, remove the limits on drivers, but also optimize so that there's fewer empty miles done. So that might be where there's a commercial use case. So that might happen first. The thing that scares me is 32 tons. There's a hell of a lot of kinetic energy at motorway speed. So you're going to have a lot of confidence that you know how to control those and to manage failures. You know, a tire blowout at that speed is quite a scary thing. I've never been in one, but I've seen it happen.
Cool. So just to make sure we give as many people a chance as possible, I'm going to take a group of 3 questions, and could you please keep them short? The gentleman in blue has been waiting for a while. Then I will take the gentleman at the front, and then the gentleman at the very back. And yeah, please keep them short.
Okay, can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I'm Councillor Ian Courts. I'm leader of Solihull Council. About 3 years ago, my officers asked me about whether I'd support acquiring an autonomous vehicle. To be honest, my initial reaction was somewhat mooted. And then I thought about it. And let me just explain why I decided we would do this with the support of Local Economic Partnership and the Combined Authority. Britain is not good at infrastructure projects. It rips the country aside. I'm in Meriden. I have that other big rail project. And the future, to me, is in making use of existing road space and adapting it and making it using it as best as possible. Secondly, tech. These machines are giant learning machines. You know, in the future, there's potential for, dare I say, picking up and spotting potholes, learning obstacles. It can be taken on board, and by the way, it can be put back to the centre very quickly. The potential for better transport alternatives. When I did media on this, I was like, oh, this is going to put drivers out of jobs. We're not going to need... That's absolute rubbish. It is the potential for greater transport alternatives. And then in my patch, I have Birmingham Airport, our responsibility as a local authority, the NEC, some great business parks where I see the potential for trying them out.
Sorry, could I just get to the question? Sorry, we're just
I'm
short
coming
of
to that now, but I think this is important, where we have the potential for test beds. Now, my question is, and it's sort of enhanced by this, is, you know, we give attention to the tech, but this will be killed by sensationalism about accidents and things like that. And our real attention needs to be on or how do we get attention given to people behaviour? Because, you know, people are particularly elderly who are, you know, puzzled with, like me, with apps and all that sort of thing. And really we need the focus, not to move away from the tech to people behaviour, and how are we going to do that? And how do we get acceptance of this technology?
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. I would be interested in getting the panel's views on the risk around cyber attacks, you know, potentially even cyber terrorism, and things like that in the context of automated vehicles. Obviously not wishing to be sensationalist, but we've seen how easy sometimes it is to hack certain systems in recent years and the damage that can do. I'd just be interested in seeing how we would look to manage that risk and how we would look to manage public concern about that risk.
And last one, then we'll do another round of questions, these two, and then we'll...
Stephen Ford, party member from Rutland and Melton. A question for Laura, really. As the future of fully automated cars always just seems to be a few years away, seems to have been out the way for a decade or so, has the level of interest from the car manufacturers in your area waned, or has it remained the same, or do you know, has it increased?
Cool. So who wants to start?
I'm happy to speak about cyber risk and cyber attack, because I think obviously from an insurance point of view it's incredibly interesting, but it's also something that as sort of industry and alongside DFT we've been talking about a bit as well. I think the reality is that, as I said earlier, most vehicles that are on the road that have been manufactured in the last 8 years are connected, and an awful lot of the technology that we're speaking about enabling autonomous driving is already fitted to cars. So your automatic lane keep, your autonomous emergency braking, those are already in vehicles. And I think that the reality is that the vehicle manufacturers have built up a real kind of understanding of vulnerabilities of vehicles and how they need to protect those vehicles. So I think that cyber attacks in any form don't become more risky when we go from level 2 to level 3, that the risk is already there and being actively managed. I think the important thing is, again, consumer awareness. So absolutely the same way as your banking app on your mobile phone, or the passwords on your work computer being different to the passwords on your Hotmail account, you know, absolutely making sure that people understand where somebody could potentially infiltrate their vehicle. So a good example was that you can now get remote entry to vehicles with an app on your phone on some vehicles, and you can give those to your friend for a period of time. So they can download the app, you can give them to your friends so they can drive your car for a particular event. It's a really great piece of technology, but you need to time box it because you need to know when somebody doesn't have access to your car anymore. So there's a huge amount of complexity about the different technologies and vehicles, and for me the really crucial thing is making sure that there's a central body that oversees the management of these vehicles and holds all of us to account to the standard that these vehicles are manufactured, but also that the drivers, even in inverted commas, the people who are in that vehicle being driven, are aware of any potential vulnerabilities. And I think that will evolve over time. I don't want to be alarmist, but the risk is already there. The important thing is people know what's in their hands.
And I wholeheartedly agree, and I think that very sensible, pragmatic answer to the sort of the hacking cybersecurity threat is also the answer to the public acceptance threat. It is about, so ultimately, if your phone gets hacked, it's your fault because you've clicked on something you shouldn't do, and everybody that has a connection to the internet has a responsibility to make sure that they don't get hacked. It's nobody else's fault, right? It's yours. It's your fault. So educate yourself as to how you can be cyber secure. That's your individual responsibility if somebody's connected to the internet. It's the same for your car. Frankly, if you bought a fridge in the last year, it's the same for your fridge. So with the connection around us, that is the responsibility that you have. And the same is true of the use case for the technology. We need to understand how it works, take a responsibility as a consumer of that technology to understand how it works. And as soon as we start doing that and we understand our roles as individuals, then it gets a lot less scary and we're a lot less susceptible to the scaremongering and all the things that could go wrong, but frankly would have gone wrong anyway with more analog technology.
Can I just throw? I feel my role is becoming just to throw cold water at anything bright and positive that Ben says. But there we go.
And you're a journalist.
About a year ago, I had a chat with Edmund King at the AA because I said, I've been trying to get data out of the car companies as to how people used all this assistive technology. None of them would help. And so he did a big survey, about 30,000 members, so it was pretty good, across 20 different types of assistive technology, whether it's this advanced braking, AEB, or whatever it was, 20 different things. And we found that there are only about 5 or 6 of them where more than 60-70% of people actually used them. In an astonishing array of cases, they actively switched them off, which is quite a big deal because these car companies have spent billions researching this stuff. Tiny other little thing, when we had the big surge in fuel prices a year ago, £2 per litre, I went to all the car companies and the fleets and said, what have you got on eco mode data? Because I was still getting stuff which reminded me of the sort of advice we got in the 1970s about reducing fuel consumption by removing your roof rack. And so many cars have got eco mode. Absolutely not a single one of them had a single bit of data. So you're not wrong, but we've got a long way to go before that becomes normal behaviour.
If I can just very briefly say something encouraging. I mean, there are security measures to stop people getting into your car, but also even if they do, it's very hard to make it do something dangerous. The amount of design knowledge you'd have to have, say, to choose change the route it's doing, so it'll go and crash into something. Extraordinary amount of design knowledge you need to do that. I know of 2 systems where safety events have occurred that have been hacked in the last, 20 or 30 years. In both cases, there was insider knowledge that enabled them to do that. So I actually think the risk of something really bad occurring, than deliberately driving into something that's going to explode or whatever, is extraordinarily small. So I wouldn't worry about that too much, as I think there's other much greater things to be concerned about. So you can park that one if you give the pun.
Park it. Very good. Absolutely, wholeheartedly agree. Again, if the risk is not around the car because there's so much investment in making it secure. It's in the car manufacturer's interest to do that. The risk is around the infrastructure that it is connected to. And when we talk about the use case for trucks, one of the biggest benefits is the connected autonomous elements that connect between traffic lights and a fleet of trucks, where you can save so much fuel and so much space by just rolling them slower, so that you can then phase the traffic lights and they just roll through gently, nice and slow, nice and through, but saving fuel, saving time, not clogging up the road. It's the traffic light bit that is the weak point in that link. And I don't want to make a flippant reference here, but the Turin traffic lights in the original Italian job, that kind of thing is the risk. Getting into a traffic light system and a kind of a traffic flow system of that's the element of the connected autonomous bit that's the risk.
I can answer your question, but I think others have already answered it, which is to say that the car makers, car manufacturers are absolutely focused on this, and that, as they said, others have said, they've already got a lot of the technology. But the thing I find interesting is it's not them that are rolling it out. When you talk about autonomous, not connected, but autonomous in places like San Francisco, as somebody else has pointed out, it's tech companies. So they are rolling it out, but the manufacturing of the vehicles is up to speed. And I really do, other people have said it, but if you can get the agglomeration economy around it, it's a huge economic benefit for the whole supply chain.
Cool. So I might just take one final question. Does anyone... okay, gentleman second from the back.
Sorry. Oh.
And sorry, just keep it quick because we're running out of time.
Yeah. Will road vehicles be driverless before trains? And if I mean, trains run on tracks, it should be a much simpler proposition. And if road vehicles are driverless before trains, does that mean the end of trains?
Well, there isn't a drivers' union, so probably yes.
The answer to those 2 questions are no and no. We already have driverless trains at Auckland's Light Railway, some of the RER in Paris. There's some things in Asia and so on. And the question was about the everything transferring from the rail to the road. That's not going to happen. I think rail is an interesting use case, doing high-speed transport between cities is going to be very hard, but lower-speed things like metros and so on, there's autonomous metros in Beijing as well, for example. So I think it's already there because it's a much, much easier domain. Access is controlled. You don't have to deal with such complex object detection and scenario understanding as you do for cars. So it's already there, and that will evolve.
Just one very quick point on cars is we've talked a lot about driving in terms of on motorways or commercial vehicles, large lorries. People drive for lots of reasons, and some people just love driving. Mm-hmm. Some people have cars they love, which they love to drive. And so whilst I think that we are talking about a future where we can hopefully make roads safer, make the outcomes of incidents more predictable and hopefully save lives, we also have to remember that there's a whole spectrum of reasons that people drive. And therefore, actually, what we should be looking at is where can we optimize the technology, where can we make the best use of it, where can we make sure that we're building safety and actually allow the technology and to roll out iteratively, as I think a couple of the panel members have mentioned, so that we build towards this kind of optimum future. I think the idea that we will be completely driverless in the future, anybody who's got a classic car, for example, I think might have a bit of a challenge with that. So I think the world where we have one or the other is probably many, many years off. I don't expect that in my lifetime, but what I do expect is that we'll take the best of both, which is actually, for me, the best outcome.
Well, thank you so much. So we're probably out of time for further questions, but some of the panelists might, depending how they go, might have some time to chat afterwards. Thank you so much for the wonderful panel. That was a fascinating discussion that we could have continued for much longer, time permitting. A few words of thank you. Thank you so much to Allianz for partnering with us for this event. I already said thank you to my panelists. Please feel free to stay for 15 to 20 minutes of networking time. There's coffee that needs to be drunk, which will sustain you through the last day of fringe events at conference and maybe even warm you up when it starts raining again. And yeah, feel free to carry on. Also, if you would like to join Bright Blue, and you can sign up to speak to any of us about becoming a member. Membership is £20 or £10 for students. You will see there are these tote bags. Please feel free to take them with you. It means also there are fewer that we have to take back to London. But more importantly, they contain details about the fringe events that we're hosting. We've got another, I think, 5 after this. Luckily, Ryan's not there to correct me. So please have a look at those and take a look. And yeah, hope to see you at some more events. Enjoy the rest of conference, and thank you so much to everyone for attending.